So before we get into it, I usually start by giving you some interesting perspectives, perhaps on where we see the market going or on topics that are of interest to us at the moment. I don't have very long, and I won't bore you with many slides. But we're doing a lot of work at the moment with payment facilitators, and obviously I can't talk to you about any of that. But I can talk to you about the industry trends that we're seeing. The first thing to begin with, for those in the audience who are not familiar with the PayFac, the PF model, is a quick definition. So the model's been around a long time. It's had lots of different names, master merchant. It's been through various guises, unofficial and official. It is now officially part of the payments landscape. Essentially, it's almost a mini acquirer. You can sign contracts with merchants in your own name. You can settle to those merchants and receive settlement from acquirers. And essentially, it's designed for intermediaries to manage small companies across their full customer life cycle. However, there are some limitations. You have to be regulated at least as a payments institution or also as an e-money license holder. You have to have a full Visa or MasterCard scheme member behind you, and that member has to register you. You can't sign sub-merchants with turnover over €1 million. There is a waiver possibility there. But as I said, it's designed for those small merchants. And ultimately, the acquirer still underwrites your risk. And they can back off that to you contractually, but ultimately the rest of the payment network looks to that acquirer if anything goes wrong. And as I said, it's been around in various forms, but the ones that most people tend to think about are these two brands, particularly in the MPOS market. The role they play is one of reducing onboarding costs. I think Square talk about breaking even with a merchant within 3 quarters. I imagine that with the emergence of phone as an acceptance device where they don't need any form of hardware dongle at all, that should get shorter. Faster time to payback, as I said. Faster time to trade. Some of these players specialize in making the process of onboarding as easy and quick as possible, and probably bring to the payments industry a good set of examples of best digital interaction and experience. So I think we can say that these two brands have done a fair amount to encourage us all to be more customer focused, particularly at the bottom end of the book. But the question that we had was, well, how many are there of these things? Where are they? And we've seen an uptick in interest, but is that just us and our clients, or is it part of a wider market trend? So those are the 3 questions that I'll just take you to now. So the first one is where they are, and I know there are very substantial decisions being made today about the role of Brexit, which may well influence the shape of this chart going forward. But it is fair to say that the majority of payments facilitators, and this is registered with MasterCard, are in the UK, with equally innovative markets in the Netherlands, and as we go around, gradually getting smaller. I think it's also interesting that some of the large European markets do appear towards the bottom of the number of registered PFs. You have to be very careful using these numbers. There's a mandate to register. There's not a mandate to deregister. So there are about, depending on whether you include the sort of Turkeys and Ukraines, etc., because obviously MasterCard's definition of Europe is its own. There are around 200, 250, but when you start digging into whether those numbers actually have licenses any longer, whether they actually trade any longer, there are a number that actually don't anymore. So these numbers are real, a reflection of what MasterCard reports at the moment, but it's not necessarily a reflection of what goes on in the market. So what can we say? It's probably a reflection of the degree of innovation in these respective markets. You'd expect that probably the German figure will increase, maybe partly as a consequence of Brexit. But whether this number will come down or not, we'll have to wait and see. So the second question was, what do they do? Now, I had hoped that I would be surprised by this analysis, that there would be firms in here that did weird and wacky and amazing things, and I would fall off my seat with excitement. But the reality is most of them are gateways. As we would expect, they're already selling payment services to merchants in an unregulated state, the provision of connectivity and fraud and APMs, etc. And particularly within APMs, in order to be able to operate a collect model for cards and APMs, the likelihood of these players looking to extend their offering across all of the markets is quite substantial. I think, interestingly, in the UK, most of the players are e-com. In the Netherlands, a lot of them are POS distributors, physical world players, so some slight differences. But it's still, the lion's share. Payments and disbursements, so these are the people that both take money in and push money out. So they may be paying small entities and marketplace supporters. I originally labelled that as marketplaces, but they aren't necessarily the marketplaces themselves. They support marketplaces. The Dutch market has a number, I think there's about 3, of event specialists. I don't know the last time you went to a music festival, but increasingly these days, if you go, the payments environment is incredibly consistent across the site. I went to one in East London last summer, and Square had the monopoly. And they were all Square devices, and you don't get specialist providers like that so much here in the UK. Obviously you do in the Netherlands, where they provide the connectivity in the terminals to food and drink suppliers at the venues. And then I think there was just one lonely provider who's a PF who's also a remittance provider. So I was slightly disappointed, perhaps, that the industry wasn't more diverse. But maybe it's a reflection of where growth is, a reflection of where the role that the player currently provides can easily be extended into being a PF, and the regulatory burden of doing so is relatively modest. We've only looked at the top 3 markets here. It's a bit of a pain. You have to go to every website and, in Czech or whatever it is, try and understand exactly what the business does. Payments businesses aren't notorious at being easy to understand. There's lots of generic words used. So we just looked at the top 3 markets. But as I said, those are the main ones. Now, the real reason we looked at this was because of the uptick in demand that we've seen, and to try and answer the question, and here I'm just looking at the UK, okay? So what we've done is you look at the list of PFs, and you go back and you look at the FCA and you say, okay, of these currently registered PFs, when did they get their license? Now, unfortunately, or for this exercise at least, all PIs had to re-register this year. So if you go out to the website today and you try and answer this question, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. They've all been registered this year. So initially I was very excited and I thought, it's definitely proved it. And then I realised there weren't any before 2018. So I had to knock on some friendly doors and get some historical information. So what you'll see here is not available anywhere in the public domain, and obviously it's all anonymous. So here's the first part of the reveal. So the good thing is, yes, you do actually see quite a substantial increase in the role of regulated PIs who are PFs. There's a bit of a debate about whether to be a PI you're always a PF, or whether some market participants, particularly marketplaces, should be regarded as PFs, but I won't get into that. So I think it is fair to say that the number of PFs in the UK, at least, which is the largest market, has seen a substantial uptick. And in particular, now, remember the health warning I gave you earlier on about re-registration. But so this is just the registration piece. I haven't looked at whether they're trading. As I mentioned, some of the PFs who are registered with the schemes aren't trading anymore. But if you continue this line up on the trend, and some proportion of this, as I said, will be people who previously had licenses here, but have had to re-register, and some proportion will be new providers entering the marketplace. So I think it's fair to say that the geographic distribution is fairly broad. Perhaps the UK and the Netherlands commanding the lion's share. They're very much gateway orientated when you look around Europe. And in the UK, at least, there has been a substantial uptick. So I don't know how many people in this room regularly deal with PFs. Certainly as an acquirer, it's a policy decision that you need to make about whether you wish to, where their role is, how you see interacting with them, if you want to, where you add value. There is a risk of disintermediation if it's not handled appropriately. And it's quite clear, perhaps, how the iZettls and the Squares of this world have extended the acceptance of cards, but that need not always be the case. And there is a danger, much in the same way as banks historically worried about gateways becoming full acquirers and the role of ISOs, the payment facilitator intermediary role, particularly because they sign the contract themselves, is one that you need to be aware of both the upsides and the risks of dealing with PFs.